Long before the conflicts we all know about in the Middle East, the United States fought its very first overseas war. And you might be surprised to learn it was against pirates. We're talking about a conflict that really built the U.S. Navy, totally redefined American foreign policy. And it all kicked off with one single, shocking act of aggression. This is America's showdown with the Barbary Pirates.
But let's start with a question. How exactly do you declare war without uttering a single word? I'm not talking about some formal announcement or a piece of paper. I mean, what's a single symbolic act that is so clear, so unambiguous, that there's just no way to misunderstand it?
Well, back in 1801, the ruler of Tripoli, which was a city-state on the North African coast, he had a pretty dramatic answer to that question. What you do is you send your men over to the enemy's consulate, and you chop down their flagpole. It was the ultimate diplomatic insult. It was an unmistakable declaration of war. But, to really get why a flagpole mattered that much, we need to take a step back and look at who exactly America was dealing with here.
So this enemy, we're talking about the Barbary states of North Africa. For literally centuries, their pirates had been the terror of the Mediterranean. And listen, this wasn't just a few rogue ships flying a skull and crossbones. Oh no, this was a state-sponsored industry of kidnapping and extortion.
The sheer scale of their operation is, well, it's just staggering. Over a 300-year period, it's estimated that the Barbary Pirates enslaved over 1 million Europeans. This was a massive, terrifying enterprise that hit sea lanes and coastal towns alike. And their reach was honestly astonishing. They were raiding the coasts of France, Italy, and Sicily. But get this, they even launched raids as far north as Iceland, specifically to hunt for captives. It felt like nowhere was safe.
So, you might be asking, what was the justification for this massive slave trade? Well, in this specific historical context, the Barbary states were using a particular interpretation of Islamic law, or Sharia. This interpretation, while it forbade enslaving fellow Muslims, was used to permit the capture of non-Muslims, and that created a state-sanctioned rationale for their thriving slave markets.
So how did the brand new United States of America decide to handle this huge threat to its merchant ships? Well, initially, they took what seemed like the easier path. They decided to pay for peace.
I mean, you have to put yourself in their shoes. The young nation faced a really tough choice. Paying tribute, it was just seen as a cost-saving measure. It was way cheaper than losing ships, cargo, and sailors. Going to war, that was an incredibly risky, incredibly expensive option for a new country with a, frankly, tiny navy.
So, by the late 1700s, the U.S. had deals in place with most of the Barbary states. Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. In effect, they were just paying protection money. But there was one very powerful man in the government who absolutely hated this policy with a passion.
And that man was, of course, Thomas Jefferson. For him, this wasn't about economics at all. It was a matter of national honor, of principle. And he had this really powerful historical analogy for what America was doing.
He called it a modern Danegeld. What a phrase. It just perfectly captured his disgust with the whole policy. So, what exactly did he mean by that?
Well, the Danegeld was the tribute that Saxon England paid to Viking raiders centuries earlier, and as history showed, it was a totally failed strategy. You see, paying off the Vikings didn't stop their attacks, it just encouraged them to come back for more money. Jefferson saw a direct parallel. Paying extortion was a sign of weakness that would only invite more aggression.
And wouldn't you know it, soon after Jefferson became president, his theory was put to the ultimate test. The ruler of Tripoli decided his share of the American tribute just wasn't enough, and he was ready to force the issue.
The Pasha of Tripoli, a man named Yusuf Karamanli, he felt insulted by the American payments, and he decided to demand more. He was already at war with Sweden, had seized 14 of their ships, and now he started going after American merchant vessels. And these attacks had a particularly grim reality. Any women captured from the ships were considered high-value prizes, and they were almost never ransomed.
Things escalated, and they escalated fast. After some initial attacks on U.S. ships, the Pasha made his big move on May 14, 1801, chopping down that flagpole. An outraged Jefferson responded in June by dispatching a U.S. Navy squadron. By the time the American commander, Commodore Dale, arrived at Gibraltar on July 1st, he found out that his country was already at war.
And this right here, this was a truly historic moment. President Jefferson, The same man who had argued against paying tribute for years sent the United States Navy on its first ever mission to a foreign shore. This was a fundamental shift from paying for peace to projecting power.
So the Navy sailed for the now famous shores of Tripoli. But with a pretty small fleet thousands of miles from home, the huge question remained, would a show of force actually be enough to end the pirate threat for good?